My name is Rebecca Lemon, and I'm the director of the Levan Institute for the Humanities here at USC. Thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation about Afroditi Angelopoulou's book, The Body and the Senses in Greek Tragedy, which just appeared with Oxford University Press in 2025. We do invite everyone who is able to please turn on your camera if that's possible for you. It's just a nicer occasion if we can see the faces of our colleagues and friends who are joining us. Yeah, that's so nice. Hi, everyone. Um, Today, we are also joined by commentators, Ella Haselswerdt, who is assistant professor of classics at UCLA. Thank you so much for joining us. And Peter Meineck, who is Associate Professor of Classics in the Modern World at NYU. Thank you also. The conversation will be moderated by our wonderful colleague, Susan Lape, who is Associate Professor of Classics here at USC. Today's conversation was organized in partnership with the Department of Classics, with the School of Dramatic Arts, the Critical Studies track, and the Center for the Premodern World. It was also organized in large part by the Levan's associate director, Zach Mann. So I'd like to give him a big shout out. Thank you, Zach. He's hiding behind the LIH banner. Our program today will start with a very short introduction to the book by Afroditi. She will then be in conversation with Professors Haselswerdt and Meineck for roughly 30 to 35 minutes. At that time, Professor Lape will open the floor to questions from everyone. You will be able to ask questions by raising your Zoom hand or just kind of waving into the camera. One thing that I've noticed is over the course of what is often a captivating conversation between author and the two guest interlocutors, the audience can begin to take quite a passive role, sort of understandably because it's really fun to listen. But for those of you who do have questions, I really encourage you to formulate them as you hear Afroditi, Ella, and Peter converse, so that when Susan opens up the floor, you're kind of ready to join in. Afroditi, many congratulations on your wonderful book. Please begin by telling us about it.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thanks. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Zach, who has been going back and forth with me all this time. And thank you to all my colleagues and all the people who are here, and especially Peter and Ella. And I look forward to the conversation. So I will just say a few words about the book, and then I'm happy to start talking about it with other people. So the central aim of the book was to trace the role of the body and the senses across a range of Greek tragic plays in order to show that meaning, ethical meaning, social meaning, political meaning, emotional, affective meaning, is communicated not only intellectually but also viscerally. And that led me to take a more holistic approach and to think about these plays not just as texts but also as performances designed to be experienced through embodied and sensory engagement. So in other words, instead of thinking about tragedy as something we interpret from a distance, we're also invited to think about it as something we experience. And I would say the main question that guided this project was why and how theater works the way it does. And one compelling answer, in my view, is that so much of our awareness and experience is located precisely, it's rooted in the living body. So the aim in the book was to show how and why the dramas of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides are as engaging as they are. Not in an effort to reconstruct how an ancient audience may have responded, which is impossible, but really in terms of the kinds of embodied responses these plays invite and they make possible. So just to give a few examples from the tragedies I discuss in the book, in Aeschylus' Oresteia, there are moments where language and performance work together to provoke our sense of taste and smell that can produce a sense of disgust, physical but also moral. So we don't just understand that something is deeply wrong, we're also invited to feel it. There is also this recurring sense of weight and pressure that encourages us to register suffering, which is central to the entire trilogy, almost in physical terms as something that has to be carried. In Euripides' estrogen women, bodies are constantly collapsing, they're being dragged, which draws attention to this very visceral sense of human fragility. And in plays such as the Ajax or the Medea, trauma shows up as this breakdown in our ability to feel together with others, with our community. So here the body becomes a way of thinking about social and ethical breakdown. So if we take seriously the idea that tragedy can rely on and create a kind of embodied shared experience, then we can better understand how the plays engage political and ethical questions, not just by presenting arguments, but also by encouraging audiences to feel their way through them. So, just to sum up and close this kind of small introduction, one way to really think of this book is as an invitation, really, to read Greek tragedy a bit differently, not just as something we analyze, but also something we experience holistically, where meaning emerges through the interaction of mind, body, and the senses. That's in a nutshell.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. I was so captivated. I'm sorry. I was like not expecting you to end. Um, so we worked out that Peter will take off with the first questions, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Aphrodite. It's great to be here and to have known you for so long and seen the journey that you've been on and read this wonderful book, which I really enjoyed. And I learned a bunch of stuff from it too, which is doesn't always happen when you read other people's books, but I really did learn a lot from this. So I have a lot of questions, but I wanted to frame the book by uh, you've reminded us that theatre is a collective experience. It's an emotional experience and it's an embodied experience. I'm putting the dash between the M and the bodied, right? There's an embodied experience that our bodies as spectators, as audience, are with the actors in that space. And there's a thread, an invisible thread between the two. And our big challenge as classicists is we're writing about what is a live experience in a moment. Originally, like one performance, and that was it, right? Originally, and incredible. And how do we do that? And for many years, we kind of gave up. Philologists, right? We can never know, right? We can never understand. And then there's been in the last 10, 20 years, this amazing sensorial turn, cognitive turn into this work. And I think your book has contributed to that really beautifully. So it's really good to see. And I think you've also brought up some fascinating questions. The first thing that really occurred to me is a statement really before questions, as I've got loads of questions, is I love the way that you take the term asenestai and you then take Aristotle's term sunastenestai, right? That
Mhm.
already asenestai has this sense of we're feeling with something, right? We're perceiving something. But then the sun added onto it is the golden ticket, I think, for your whole thesis. And I think that really helped me think more deeply about ancient ideas as aesthetics beyond the theatre as well as this sense of shared experience, right? Something is happening to me while I experience this thing that's very active and it's happening to my body. And there's a sense of movement about that. And then I loved how you took that straight into the Oresteia. And I love this theory of Rasa of disgust, right? And Richard Schechner's a buddy of mine. And of course, Rasa theory was something that he brought to us um, from India. And but I love this Rasa of disgust in the Oresteia. And my first question is about the Oresteia because I had never considered that very expensive purple murex stank, right? I never knew that. I thought that was remarkable. So here's my question, and I don't know what you think about this. So if it's smelly, it's really expensive, but it's also like smells like bad anchovies. Do you think Aeschylus might have actually used real murex in the production? I know that this is a very kind of mundane question, but what I'm trying to push here is, okay, yeah, we know that the spoken words can take us into an olfactory experience. And you also talk a little bit about the fact that Cassandra mentions that, she can smell the blood of the house, and we as an audience can smell the real sacrifices that are happening. But is there real smell happening as well? So that's my first question to you.
Well, I mean, we cannot really know, right? That's the first answer you can give. And it specifically for this moment, for the red carpet moment, the book that I really drew from was Melissa Muller's book, Objects as Actors, where she's drawing attention precisely to these qualities of the murex and how it could evoke this intense sense of smell. So if we accept that this could have been, and thinking about the way that, productions were expensive and very rich citizens were sponsoring this production, we can consider that this could be a possibility that we have this very precious textile on the scene, on the stage. So if this was the case, then at that moment, language together with movement on the stage and the actual props work all together to produce a very heavily sensorial but also moral atmosphere. So that would be my answer to that. And before I say anything else, I want to also acknowledge the fact that a lot of this book, where I'm drawing from, obviously, I'm grateful to people like you in our field who open up the conversation about what cognitive studies can do with the theater and especially with classics. So I just want to make this shout out, this acknowledgement right from the start.
Thank you, Afroditi. And I think I think the question moves beyond the mundane because the other way to think about the olfactory experience is if we think about Greek ritual experience, which we know
Yeah.
was full of aromas,
Yeah.
right? And we often don't think about that with the theatre, but I think we should, right? I think that it's valid that this is perhaps a whole panoply of scenic devices um,
Exactly.
that the playwright might have. So staying with disgusting stuff, I was thinking about your work on Ajax too. Um, and I love how you frame Ajax as a play of isolation. And okay, we may know that, psychologically, but also I think this idea that the feeling together is something that Ajax is not doing. And I think that's really key. So it made me then think about the psychology of him appearing the second time he appears, probably on the echiclema, like surrounded by corpses of animals that have not been sacrificed, right? They're this sort of impious deaths. And psychologically, what that does to him in terms of his isolation, even from the normal codes of disgust, right? Has this gone, is Sophocles taking this even for us as an audience, like beyond what's normal?
I do think so. And it's a great thing that you point out because you point out something that I didn't really think about when I was talking about this play, how this sensory experience of disgust could have been elicited through this visual tableau that we have in front of us with the corpses of the animals and Ajax being very visually uh, demarcated from everyone else on the stage and in the audience. Um, I do think that there is, because Sophocles, with his Ajax, he's doing something, we assume he has done something very different from all the Ajaxes that came before. And I do believe that one of the reasons why as a character, he's such a powerful character, and I'm very much drawn to this specific protagonist is because he elicits this kind of mixture of emotions that range from awe to revulsion. And one way to show that is to have this tableau, this visual tableau of the corpses on the stage. And we're constantly grappling with this kind of contradictory experiences that we're having, with these emotions that we're having, responses that we have towards this protagonist, who is admirable, but also deeply problematic to the point of revulsion, because we cannot forget that he's also a traitor. He turned against his own community. So how do we stage that to make the audience feel that question. So that's one way. And thank you for mentioning that. I didn't talk about it in the book. I didn't think about this detail.
But it really occurred to me, and I really like framing Ajax as a play of isolation, and the way you set that up in your thesis, that there's an aesthetic way to
Yeah,
think about his isolation as well. And his suicide speech is so strong because who's he talking to, right? And the fact the chorus are off stage and there's a physical separation. I think that's brought out really well. For my last question, I'm going to stay with the revolting stuff. I think because you've shown us a Greek tragedy can be pretty revolting. With Medea, and I really enjoyed how you talk about touch in Medea
yeah,
and the sensory side of touch. And of course, it made me think about how Medea's gift to Jason's new bride is kind of the worst way to touch somebody, and how that affects people. And then I thought you framed it really well, how that element of touch is then denied to Jason. And
yeah,
I'll put my cards on the table. I'm very sympathetic to Medea. I see Medea as a killer regeneratrix. I think when she talks about setting up her cult sanctuary, she's reminding everybody that, this is a midwife goddess, right? She gives babies and she takes them away. And she's kind of reminding Jason, well, right, this is who you married. So I I see Medea as a tragic hero in that sense. And I don't
yeah.
even know. I feel maybe the kids are dead to Jason, but not to Medea, right? She's off in a snake chariot. But I love this idea, this this ultimate tragic idea that you can't touch them, right?
Yeah.
And I, in terms of kinesthetic empathy, which is something you talk about quite a lot in the book, I wonder if you could kind of address that and other examples of even us as an audience being denied the satisfaction of touch, right? Being able to touch something.
Yeah, so again, the all conversation of the kinesthetic apathy in the theater is drawn from your analysis of your book on theater and kinesthetic empathy. So again, just to acknowledge that this is, I'm drawing specifically from what you have previously written. So specifically with touch, I think I was very interested in that because specifically in that part of the book with Ajax Medea Philoctetes, touch is an essential mechanism for establishing interpersonal relationships, building trust, and it's the fundamental sensory mechanism for specifically for familial relationships. It's the basis of core empathy, we would say. So it was really interesting to see first of all, for somebody to watch somebody else being touched on stage, as based on what we know about our cognitive architecture and how we are reactivating parts in our brain that kind of elicit this as a visceral response. It is meant to heighten moments, this kind of sympathetic response towards parents. I'm thinking here of Hecuba and Polyxena, where she says, I'm going to hold you onto her like an oak. And we can envision her trying to hold her, touch her, and they're being ripped apart. So these moments are designed to elicit pity and sympathy in the audience, I think. They're very intense and very visceral. And something like that being denied to Jason at the end of the play, it's just, to me, it's indicative, just like the Ajax in the end, where Odysseus is being denied to touch the body of Ajax to help because it may elicit disgust and anger in the dead. In some ways, this kind of denial, it's just indicative not just of the complete breakdown between this interpersonal, interfamiliar feeling together with the community and the philoi, but also in many ways perhaps it's emphasizing even more that what we're dealing here, this kind of heroine is has left it's beyond the human now. It's something different. And it's one mechanism to draw attention to this aspect of Medea together with the crane. That's what I would say. I don't know if what I said just made sense, but
Yeah, and entirely. Well, I'll stop with my questions for there and let Ella jump in. But I just want to conclude my bit by saying I think your book has really helped advance this cause of enlivening our study of Greek drama, giving us more tools to think about it and talk about it. It definitely opened some doors up to me that I hadn't thought about, and I really thank you for that. So
I'm really honored to hear that and very
very,
happy to hear that.
very well done.
Thank you.
Hello, hi. I'm
Hi.
yeah, I was also just so thrilled for the opportunity to really spend some time with this book, and it's
Thank
just
you.
full of wonderful insights. I really enjoyed it as well, and I'll just very briefly myself situate it, and then I have a few questions for you. So, as you've all heard, Aphrodite's book invites us to reconsider Greek tragedy through the lens of the body in performance, the body as kind of immanent in the text, as well as the body of the spectator or reader. Um, in its metaphorical and material incarnations, which she, argues very cogently are totally inextricable. There's all this kind of bleeding between metaphor and materiality that you draw out so well. The book teems with feeling, sensing, desiring, reviling, and enduring bodies that are overstuffed, overflowing, and under pressure, kind of teetering off balance. But in my mind, the book's like real kind of major innovation lies in the way that it posits the tragic body as a kind of visceral laboratory for moral and ethical inquiry. I think that that's a really fascinating and novel approach. And I'm going to start with actually like a very big kind of question.
Oh, no.
No, I mean, and it's okay if you don't have a ready answer for it, but it's something that I was kind of thinking about over the course of reading it. There's kind of various ways in which your book kind of puts pressure on traditional definitions of tragedy. So I'm thinking about, like, in particular, your recognition of the significance of gaster and appetite, um, as kind of central to tragedy's meaning making, which is often considered the remit of sort of lower genres. I'm thinking about your challenge to logos or mythos driven interpretations of tragedy. And I'm also thinking about, for example, the like ultimately recuperative trajectory that you see in the Philoctetes, where, eistasis is restored and ultimately so is philia. And so my question for you is, do you have now a kind of working definition of tragedy, like your own
Oh my
definition of the
goodness.
genre?
Oh, no, no, I don't. I really don't. This is a big question. If it in its essence, I guess, is, and I'm just cheating here because I'm reminded of something I read in a different theater book of how bodies come on the stage and tell stories to other bodies. And we cannot afford to forget that basic aspect of tragedy as performance. So I would add that to everything, the Aristotelian understanding of the representation of a serious action and all that through materiality and through the body to another body. And this is the fundamental difference between tragedy and all sorts of dramatic performances and other ways of doing storytelling. So this kind of immediacy that tragedy and comedy and other drama enables. That would be my addition. And as you mentioned before, precisely because later traditions have so much been influenced by the way that Aristotle talks about tragedy as this kind of the heart, the soul of tragedy is its plot. And they're disparaging in some ways this kind of logocentric way of doing theater. My intervention was no, actually, if you look back at the actual context and what tragedy was doing at the time is much more immediate, much more embodied. It's not just the intellectual component, it's also this visceral aspect to it. So that would be an attempt to answer this really big question, and I don't know if I really don't know if I did it justice, but
No, thank you for humoring me. Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it because I mean, I think that, something that you show so well are like the limitations of that Aristotelian model. Like I'm thinking in particular of your analyses. I really love the pairing of the Persians and the Trojan women as plays where like nothing happens, right? So
yeah,
and yet you show like even within this what's the word you use? Staticity? I think it's a
yes,
right.
yes,
Yeah, even within this staticity, there is all of this kind of dynamism.
yeah.
If you're kind of paying attention to this sort of like potential, kind of kinetic potential of these bodies and the way.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we now can appreciate when we learn from these other fields in cognitive studies is how much language is an embodied mechanism and
Hmm.
can in itself, it's not just something that it's not just representational. It really evokes embodied experience. So if we take that seriously, then languages, plays such as the Persian and the Trojan women, if we pay attention to language, it can give us a sense of what could have happened on the stage with those movements and these bodies. So that's another, I think, great advantage that we have by drawing from these kind of other fields that have a sense of what's going on with the human mind and the psyche and how we respond to our environment.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Um, I have another question, which is also, again, sorry, it's kind of a big question, but I was,
Fair enough.
but it kind of follows off a bit of the conversation you were having with Peter about Ajax and about, feeling together and isolation. And I really liked your insight that Sophocles might have like differently from predecessors who staged this drama, might have cast the chorus as sailors of Ajax in order precisely actually to emphasize his isolation, to show the way that those bonds are broken. And it made me wonder if you had thought, more over the course of writing the book about kind of the choral body.
I know.
You
You
know,
have
you
to
could
say you have to say about it because I know you are writing. You have
no, I
written.
mean, not in the way that you are. I'm just curious,
I yes.
beyond kind of serving, which I do think you're right, like the ways in which it kind of serves as this foil for the tragic body. But, I'm just curious if throughout writing it.
I have, so I didn't want, when I was thinking about this place, I didn't want to ignore the chorus.
Mhm.
So I was, the example that you give with Ajax or Philoctetes in that, for that
Mhm.
matter, what is happening between the character, the protagonist, and the chorus, this kind of interaction, this intersensory interaction was really to me was standing out. So whenever I could in the plays that I talk about, I would think about the choral body. But because there have been so many other studies that talk about choral performance, dance performance, I thought, well, I should stick more to something that hasn't, in my mind, been so much discussed. But I'm really, I'm not, it feels like I'm throwing the question back to you, but I'm really wondering, based on your own work and your own research, if this conversation in this book made you think what it made you think about the chorus, because if you came to some conclusions or some kind of thoughts that you didn't have before, perhaps that's kind of a major win for me. So I'm really curious to how do you see this, what's going on the stage?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of, I won't try not to talk too long about this, but I'm always kind of really fascinated by the sort of slippage between the individual and the plural body of the chorus. And so, what you made me wonder, like I was really, really taken, like one of my favorite things in the book is the way you talk about these bodily metaphors throughout the Oresteia and the like overflowing body and the leaking body and these bodies kind of out of balance and kind of out of whack. And it made me wonder, like, I don't know, I think it would be really interesting to try to trace the ways that like the chorus can kind of move between the sort of individual and collective body to demonstrate like surfeit or lack, or you know what I mean? Like one body kind of overflowing into the other in order
Of
to
course.
kind of take up the excess. This is a very
Yeah.
sort of abstract answer, but
No, no, it's not. And of course, you pointed out the other side, and I didn't think to mention that the chorus at the last in the last installment, where you have this very hefty bodies doing all sorts of things on the stage, and essentially literalizing a metaphor that was,
yes.
all throughout the trilogy. So you're absolutely right to point this out, and I don't know why I didn't think about it at
No,
all.
not at all. And yeah, but I think you also show how that's so interesting because you use some great phrase again that I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to come up with, but that these are like highly embodied disim nobodies. Is that what
Yes,
you said? Yes.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And because this was my dogs are being heard from the distance, but this phrase was inspired by a book I was reading on narratology, where the author was actually noting how characters in literature that are heavily embodied tend to have this kind of negative, to elicit this kind of negative perception.
Mm,
Whereas you have more disembodied figures such as Athena, who is light, and it's just she represents reason and rationality and all these things. And I thought, this is on the stage. To me, this is the perfect example of what
yeah.
this author is picking up in narratives and in literature, in prose.
Mhm.
So that's where it came from.
Oh, thanks. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's really, really interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think we said maybe now is the time to turn to
Yes, if you're
yeah.
finished. Yeah.
I mean, well, I could talk to Aphrodite all day, but
Okay. Oh, well, let's just organically see if there are any questions, and I'm sure you can jump back in. Okay. Well, Hector has a question. Please unmute.
Hi,
Hi,
thank you.
Hector.
Hi, Afroditi. So good to see you.
Good to see
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to read your book like I was for Anne Marie and Natanya, but so forgive me if you answered this question in your book. I really loved how I see in younger scholars kind of thinking about experience and demystifying it, and actually being able to make claims about his experience. And I really appreciated your how you said against the empirical, right? I'm not here to reconstruct the historical, empirical, historical. I appreciate that, but I also wonder, I think about Alexiou's study of ritual lament and its continuities in Greek culture. And I also think about just the legacy of the classical tradition. And I wonder what's at stake for you in precisely not constructing the historical, empirical audience, about not making those kinds of claims and instead relying on a kind of different set of experience.
Well, I mean, it's just it's not exactly what is at stake because it's you cannot it's impossible to reconstruct these experiences. So for me, what was important is to show, okay, here we have these performances, this text really. How much can we be how can they guide us to reconstruct the kind of embodied experiences that they have the potential to elicit, and how do I as a reader now put my somatic practices and my own embodied experiences in analyzing and interpreting this text. So for me it was a very valuable experience because really it made me think very seriously about the question of performance and how these plays, which people like Peter constantly emphasize that these were just blueprints for the actual performance. So for me, this was one way to think of how it could be experienced as a performance. That was the biggest take, the biggest advantage and the stake that I had, I guess. That would be my response. So the benefits that we gain by employing this kind of methodological framework into a reading of Greek tragedy, of dramatic performances in general, it just I think makes us more better aware of our own embodiment in many ways when we're actively putting it into our reading. It just doesn't become disembodied anymore. That's what I would say. I don't know if I answered your question.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Alex.
Hi.
Hi,
I've been
Alex.
enjoying.
It's
Hi.
so happy to see you.
I've been enjoying this so much. I have a kind of basic question, but I'd just love to hear you talk about it, and that is about the whole question of stylization. So, what does it mean? I mean, you made it quite clear that the audience isn't experiencing the same thing as the characters on stage, but we have this really interesting complication to do with conventions of staging, costume, and also I was thinking a little bit about time, how the time that's playing out on stage is different to the time that the audience is experiencing.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask you how as you were writing the book, was this something that was a hindrance or a help, or, how did you kind of manage that? Or what
I
kind of, just talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I time was something that I didn't think about, to be honest with you, Alex. I was just the way I was doing the research and thinking about this place was I was just immersing myself into reading the text, which is, again, it's kind of a little bit logocentric, but I was trying to recreate an experience for myself based on what I could understand that, exactly what you were talking about, these conventions and the staging and everything that we know about the context and how we can make this work together with the language so that we can recreate this kind of embodied sensory experience. So in wherever possible, I was actively trying to take into account whatever it is that we know about these practices. But time is something that I really didn't think about that much, to be honest with you. I
That's
don't know
great.
if you have any ideas or any.
No, I'm not at all. I think obviously you didn't need to think about it, but I'm just really interested in the friction, the numbers of differences
Yeah.
between. I'm really interested in what you've isolated as that bridge and it's precisely because it's not simultaneous it's not completely simultaneous emotion or affect. It's not it's not seamless as a transition, and that's what I love about your project. So I was just thinking of ways in which you have these lovely bumps between the audience, or points of friction between the audience and the stage characters. I don't know, I just loved it. I just wanted to comment on it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Emma?
Hi. Um, First
Hi.
off, thank you so much to you for this wonderful book. Thank you so much to the organizers for making this on Zoom. It's a huge blessing for accessibility. I have a hyper-specific question and a very broad question, and I don't want to take up time with both. Which would you prefer?
Oh, I don't. It's up to you. Whatever I don't want to direct you. So.
Uh, okay, we'll go broad. Um,
Okay.
So I'm in your book you mentioned Raza, you've mentioned the sort of Schechnerian bent with that. I am wondering for you, you have the Amy Cook citation of like bodies coming on stage to talk to other bodies. I'm wondering in your framework, like where does the performer sit in this network? Like, are you kind of following the sort of the Grotowski towards a poor theater school where like the actor is sort of supposed to follow the via negativa and kind of eliminate blocks, sort of just be the vessel for some sort of unadulterated authorial word, or like I don't know. I'm thinking through like the actor because when my experience with Raza boxes is as a performance exercise as as a piece of actor training. Um, and when we have so much weighted on these bodies, I'm wondering like what you think of the sort of agential, where is the agency or the kind of specificity of the individual performer? And in that similar vein, like is this something, you talk about like visceral, like sort of visceral hermeneutics.
Mhm.
Um, is this anything that runs into like contemporary study of like performance as a means of understanding in sort of present day? Like, is there any physical exercises, talking to actors, witnessing performance in the you as a scholar or like us as a field, Where does that stand for you?
Well, this is a big question.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. And I will try to give an answer, but I would say that this is something perhaps that a theater director and scholar perhaps is better able to answer,
Sure.
but I will try. So first of all, the thing about, those ancient performers is that what is unique about ancient Athenian performances was that these were citizens who were performing in all sorts of contexts, not just the theater, but also having dance in a chorus, being part of this collective embodied experience of performing in almost every stages of their lives. And I cannot really make any claims about what I could imagine was going on with the actor himself. And I'm saying himself because we know that there were male citizens who were performing. But what is interesting here, what to me came up immediately was what was Plato's objections to theatrical performances, precisely because he thought that by embodying these characters, these emotions, these experiences, that kind of bled into there was no separation from representation and enactment. And that was a real problem for him, for their ethical makeup. So we do have some ancient testimony, I guess, that this was potentially, for him, it was a danger. For us, is just part of what makes performance so great. So that's that kind of that. It's not really. I don't know if I'm doing justice to your question, but these are the thoughts that I had when you were asking the question now about the way to stage in modern times and in modern performances, these ancient plays. I think the way to answer this question would be the answer that each director would give to your question would vary depending on their own school of thought and what their expectations are as to the kind of performance that they want to produce. So that's kind of, I'm not sure if I answered really.
No, absolutely. No, thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for the question.
And Afroditi, can
I may come back.
Yes. I mean, Peter, I was hoping that you would jump in because I think you would be the more appropriate person to.
I have nothing to say except masks. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes, masks. That's true. Masks were, yes, they changed the entire experience for us as modern audiences because masks were blocking in many ways all the emotional expressions and every intense experience had to be conveyed through the body. So in many ways we didn't have access to facial expressions, but in that way there was much more emphasis on embodied movement and gestures on the stage. So yes, thank you for reminding me this. I can't believe I forgot about it.
Yeah, Aphrodite, I'll just jump in. Thank you. It was such a pleasure to read the book. And, I had known pieces of it, but never all together. And one of the things that really struck me that I learned a lot about was trauma. I hadn't thought about trauma as lacking feeling together. I have always thought from a modern perspective, it's lack of feeling yourself. And so I just wondered if you could maybe say a little bit more about the specificities of trauma in your context. And also what I was really interested in too is the connection between trauma and revenge. I hadn't thought that it was trauma motivating. I mean, it just never occurred to me to think of it that way. So any thoughts? I would love to hear more.
Yeah, the first question about how trauma is connected with this lack of feeling, that the feeling body essentially goes numb in some ways. And that was my conversation in this section was very much inspired by what's the name of the author? Bessel van der Kolk, who talks about the body very much as the traumatic experiences being not just psychological and mental, but also bodily. And I think what was specific to that culture was that precisely because there was such an intense somatic bonding, specifically when we're talking about male citizens and how they perform together on the battlefield, on the stage, in performances, in choral performances. This loss of feeling with that Aristotle captures as the basis of human friendship and philia is, I think, one way for them to conceptualize something that didn't have a word for this traumatic loss of community. So to me, that was that's the way that I approached the Ajax and the Philoctetes. The Philoctetes as a positive example instead of a negative example. So it's really in modern times we tend to think about the body of us as objectivities in isolation, whereas in the ancient culture, this kind of communal bonding was very muscular in many ways, as other scholars have pointed out. And one way to show that on the stage was to show the raptures of these bonds, not just as a representation, but also something quite physical that can manifest itself also in the language. So that would be my answer about trauma in the feeling body. And then with revenge, what what inspired me to read Medea, because it's mostly about the Medea that I approached the play from this perspective, was again reading a good amount of books that talk about as trauma following revenge following a traumatic experience, and how that can this desire that Aristotle talks about to retaliate, to have the other person perceive the revenge, is again in the way that the ancient Greeks, at least from what we have, from the evidence that we have that understood it, is manifesting in pretty bodily physical terms again. So this kind of pain and pleasure that for Aristotle is essential to defining anger and the desire to retaliate, to take vengeance. I think with the Medea, we see it very well happening through the language and on the stage. So that's it's a little bit. I'm not framing it in the best possible way right now, but this is where I'm starting, my starting point. The conversations in studies that I have read about how these two, revenge and trauma, are actually connected, and revenge can result from a traumatic experience, and it can be a response to trauma, unresolved trauma, obviously, and create more trauma, obviously.
Yeah, it's just a really interesting way to think about the revenge cycle in general and Boris Gaia. But thank you so much. Greg.
Oh, thank you, Aphrodite. This whole session is wonderful, and thank you so much for the book that I've really learned a lot from.
Thank you.
I have kind of a narrow question, but it's in two parts. And I want to get back to this thing about the stinky murex, which, again, I also was very surprised. I had never thought about this till I read it in your chapter. And I'm wondering if it would have been very interesting if the tapestry had actually been dyed with this and the audience could smell it. But I'm wondering if it's really necessary, because if they had smelled it before, then their bodily recollection would have been triggered, right?
Correct.
Or if, since it's so expensive, maybe they hadn't smelled it before, but they knew it was smelly, right? So there's a kind of cultural knowledge there.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Yes, I mean the whole point about language being deeply embodied is that precisely it draws from previous experiences,
Yeah.
sensory experiences. So you don't necessarily need to have the murex, the oozing of the stinky smell. You can also recreate it in your mind's eye or nose in this case.
Yeah.
Very
So when you see the color, it
yeah.
kind of,
Yeah, it can
yeah,
trigger that.
you get this, oh yeah, that
Yes.
stinks. Um, but that's also interesting, and I want to come back to the fact of my surprise that the Greeks had, of course, access to that cultural knowledge that we have to have information about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is where a lot of work has to come in still in
Yeah,
talking about this
exactly.
place.
So that's another thing that I was trying to balance in my conversation in the book, to think about it, how the kind of the what the text can trigger, the somatic responses, but also wherever possible to take into account the cultural experience and knowledge and the repertoire that that audience had, and it could much more easily elicit a response in that specific audience, in that specific culture, whereas, as you point out, in our modern settings, you really have to have this knowledge in order to appreciate what's going on. So, I was trying wherever possible to bring in the cultural specificity and how certain experiences are culturally embedded and shaped, in order to appreciate what the play is doing at a given moment.
Right. Yeah. But it remains still a limitation in modern performances, right? The audience just doesn't have
No,
that
it's true,
aspect of it available.
but
So
the hope is that
unless we've read your book and now we know, oh,
yes,
disgusting.
but that's exactly the hope is that when you read the play in this way and you're pointing out something that probably somebody didn't pick up, maybe in a different production, they can do something about it. They can
Yeah.
evoke this kind of sensorial stimuli. And that's the hope, that this
Yeah.
is precisely the kind of reading that would inspire somebody to think about, oh, now I want to think about how to stage it differently, to bring out aspects of the play that were not immediately apparent to me the first time. So that's the hope.
Yeah. Well, that opens up really interesting possibilities, I think.
Hopefully.
Rena?
Thank you so much. Hi, Aphrodite. It's so great to see you. You know, I'm a huge fan, and I haven't read your book yet, but I'm so excited to get it. And I had never thought about reading the plays through the senses in this way, specifically the sense of smell. And so I don't know if you've done any work on this, but I heard Medea mentioned in Trojan Women, and I'm really curious about the Bacchae, because that is very much of the body, right? And bodies in ecstasy, bodies that are out of doors, that can't be contained, bodies that have been separated. And I'm just wondering if you had looked at that play. This is probably a bigger question. And if you had read instances in the play through the sense of smell, I'd be really curious to hear about that.
So the Bacchae, one of the reasons why I didn't include, first of all, I wanted the one of the reasons why I do not include some places, because I wanted to create a coherence, to have a coherent
Sure.
argument. But really, the reason why I left Bacchae outside the book is because there has been a lot of conversation about how heavily, how thick with embodiment this play is.
Yeah.
So it was one of the reasons why I didn't address a specific place, that it is already, scholars have already pointed out how deeply visceral and embodied this play is. And I thought, well, I'm not going to include it, because I will reiterate in many ways points that have already been addressed about this play. What I wanted to do is show how, okay, we can also think about these other plays in similar terms and think more broadly about the genre and what it is doing. So that's why the Bacchae, you're absolutely right to make these points. The reason why I did not include it, I read it, I thought about it, but I thought, I don't think there is anything more to say. Maybe there is, and actually, it would be wonderful if somebody built on what I'm talking about to think about a different way to think about the Bakai. But that's why I didn't include the Bakai or the Hecuba, for instance,
Mm.
because there have been people have already noticed that they're really corporeal, deeply corporeal,
Mm.
and that's why I left it out.
Thank you.
Vern?
Hey, thank you for this. I had a question kind of about um like going back to disgusting things, but also like feeling together. I was like I was wondering about the the appearance of like Oedipus and Oedipus at Colonus, or like thinking about Electra in like Euripides' Electra. Like just like the contact between siblings, which is like it's like it feels like gross and weird when you're reading it, but also like Oedipus and Electra both have like outwardly like dirty appearances. Like they're kind of like they're in rags, they're in tatters. I was like wondering maybe what you had to say perhaps about like that touch, about like maybe like the like embodied like moral taint and like what that's doing when it's like displayed on the body like that.
You're absolutely right. You just pointed it out that exactly when you see touch being staged in this way between these characters, where you have this kind of incestuous with Oedipus, right? That this is precisely what it can evoke, what the kind of response that it is expected to provoke. And again, specifically with Oedipus and with Electra, Nancy Worman in her book in Tragic Bodies has already addressed specifically how touch is operating on the stage in this context, in this problematic context, how, it's evocation of violent proximity, of incest, of everything that you've already addressed, that you've pointed out already. So in many ways, you've already given the answer to this question. This is precisely how we can think of touch operating in these specific plays, and the ethical questions that it provokes, which was my interest. How do we think about embodied experience in connection with deeply ethical questions? Yeah.
Emma?
I can. It's related to Vern's. My hyper-specific question from earlier is related to Vern's.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk twice if I'm stepping on somebody else, so absolutely, I'm happy to pass the
There's
football.
no one else with their hand up.
Okay. So speaking of sort of violent proximity and disgust, in your Oresteia chapter, I'm wondering about not Cassandra in her sort of capacity in her relation to the House of Atreus. I'm wondering about Cassandra in her relationship to Apollo. Because one of the lines that always really jumps out for me is the breathing his caress over her, the kind of the wrestler comparison. So I'm wondering, like, what do you make of disgust and pressure for sort of manifesting an unseen divine? Like, how is the body of Cassandra and the violent proximity that she experienced in the past and is kind of still experiencing with the sort of oracular numen of Apollo, like, in her?
Yeah.
What do you make of, like, because I don't know, I think about like the breath on her as like a thing of like disgust and heat and smell, and how, that's a very
Yeah.
visceral image, and like the wrestler comparison as well. So yeah, I'm just wondering like where you're at.
No, I mean, this is you're absolutely correct to think about Electra and the way that we want to imagine that this language operates together with her own performance of this specific experience as she having of the divine. And it is precisely this concept of weight and pressure that runs through the entire trilogy in both language and performance. And what you're referring to precisely ties with this surfeit of violence, of sexual violence, of greed, of everything that the body has to is weighed down by it, or even crushed in the case of Cassandra. So it ties with this kind of, in my conversation, of the way that the language works in the Aristeia, the language of suffering and weight and pressure, and surfeit, the Cassandra scene. And I think that's why even in antiquity it was so much appreciated for the kind of astonishment that it generated. It's because it ties her performance and her language and the way she interacts with the house and the way she talks about this invisible presence of the god that is weighed down on her, that is violently pushing her down. And this kind of all these things that you just talked about really emphasizes and highlights the themes that pervade the entire trilogy that are deeply problematic. So it really, again, reinforces everything that the Cassandra scene is meant to provoke, because she's the one that senses the smell of decay and the corpses. She's the one who generates in the audience this unsettling experience of everything, all the sensorial stimuli that are just going wrong. And that is essentially adding to the whole experience, what you're just mentioning, because obviously this kind of metaphysical understanding of, the invisible presence of the divine and what it's doing to us, right? And the yoke that Aeschylus is so fond of using, and all of that, I think, are instantiated through Cassandra's performance. So to me, what would be really fascinating is to see how an actor would choose to perform this very central scene for the entire Oresteia, for what the themes and the ideas and the questions that the Oresteia asks. So yes, thank you for pointing it out, and I hope I added something to your. You had already thought about it.
No,
Well,
absolutely. That's
yeah.
fantastic. Thank you so much. You might get a very annoying email from me later about like possibilities with Cassandra.
Never annoying, never, never.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for this wonderful, rich conversation. I'm delighted to see that so many of you were able to stay for a couple minutes past the hour. So please join me in
Thank you, everybody,
thanking
for
Afroditi, our
being here.
commentators.
Thank you, Peter.
Susan.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you, Susan, Alex, Greg, everybody who was here. Thanks so much for your wonderful questions, and for Rebecca, thank you for organizing this.
Of course, and thank you to all of you. This is our final Levan book talk or book chat of the year. So I'll miss you all, and I look forward to seeing many of you in the fall. And in the meantime, Aphrodite, I hope you have a wonderful celebratory summer.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. Good to see you all. Bye.